To help untangle and understand this moment in our collective effort to get real with reality, to unsmother the other, this is Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Keat TV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Just a quick first note to say that with the ongoing threat to PBS and my home station, Keat TV, I've decided to expedite plans for a new channel and community, details about which will be announced in the coming weeks. Neon Galactic will remain as is for the time being, but I do plan on surviving the Orange Menace and continuing with these conversations come what may. So to do so, I'll need your help and continued support. Stay tuned. In case you haven't noticed, all the chaos and upheaval that seems to have suddenly been unleashed on American society these past several months and years has done nothing so far to slow down our community's quest for deeper truths. At times, it seems almost as if one is an immune response to the other, as if the closer we get to a fundamental revisioning of reality, the more absurd and cruel things become. Distraction through crisis. Or perhaps the crisis is meant to help drive the change. Is this all an initiatory collapse meant to spark a dark night of the human soul? If so, then as the meta-crisis metastasizes, the future remains what we make it, as long as we answer the call, that is. Our guest today, Nathan, certainly answered his. As co-host of the Liminal Phrames and Calling All Beings podcasts, he has done stellar work in helping foster deep conversations and fresh thinking around UFOs, UAPs, NHI, consciousness, and more, all while centering the human part of these transformative experiences. An absolute rock star in this field, he's one of those few folks for whom a first name is all you need. The rest is just chum for the jackals. Nathan is an articulate and nuanced advocate for this subject and for embracing all its unsettling particulars, including the deeply transformative way it seems to engage with and pick the rusty locks of our psyches. And while so many struggle with the call to adventure, more and more developments pile on. Skywatcher and David Grush and drones and sundry, while the thread gets harder and harder to follow. With Nathan's help, we'll try to isolate some signal in the squawking static and drop a pin on wherever it is that we've actually landed. Welcome back to the show, Nathan.
Great to be with you, James.
I love talking to you, so this is going to be a good time for me. So thank you for coming on. Um, yeah, I've had you on the show a couple times, and we've done panel discussions and whatnot. But I'd like to get a little bit more into your own personal story. So let's just start sort of big and ask the question: how did you end up in this strange, weird, wonderful world of UFOs and sundry?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for having me on those panels. It's been great conversations. So I think it is good to kind of get into my background. At least helps me figure out how I got here too. So I grew up in a Southern Christian household. My dad was a minister in the Baptist tradition. And for those of you who probably aren't familiar, which is probably most people with the Baptist tradition, there's kind of a liberal side of the Baptists, and there's a conservative side, or I guess people might call them the fundamentalist side. So I grew up in the progressive liberal side of the Baptist faith, and was a preacher's kid. So I moved around a good bit, and ultimately I grew up most of my young adult life in Georgia. But I was wrestling with these big questions of life every week, at least a couple times a week, sitting in the pew or being a participant in the youth group, those kinds of activities. So always kind of thinking about these things and trying to engage with the bigger ultimate questions of life. Ended up going to do an undergrad in finance, so completely unrelated to anything that I do now. But while I was doing that degree, I think I decided that I still needed more answers to these deeper questions. And so I decided to go to seminary. Now, that was a path that I knew my father had taken. In fact, he not only did that, but he also has a PhD in New Testament. So I was comfortable pursuing an academic pathway in that field and felt a calling, if you will, to do that. So once I graduated, I went to seminary, did a 3-year degree in Atlanta. And it was probably sometime in my first year of seminary where I really experienced what many people call the dark night of the soul, that kind of crisis of faith, existential crisis, a type of ontological shock, if you will. And that was interesting to me, something I wasn't expecting because I was coming at the education from a more liberal, at least what I thought, very open-minded perspective. I thought that I probably wouldn't be fazed by this kind of education, at least in the same way that maybe my peers might be impacted who came from more conservative backgrounds. But nevertheless, I was, and that kind of came out of a couple of classes I took my very first semester in modern theology. So I got to study the theologians of the 20th century. One that really impacted me quite profoundly was Paul Tillich, and so his work was really meaningful to me. The ground of being, that's kind of his phrase. And then that summer term, I had a chance to take a small class on process theology, which is a theology that comes from Alfred North Whitehead, Charles Hartshorne, and it really focused kind of more on a mathematical, very scientifically minded perspective on God. And I found that to be very intriguing, very fascinating, that God could be, instead of what I think many of us are taught if we grow up in a faith tradition, be kind of like the father in the sky, this very sort of omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient power that in process theology, God basically doesn't have unlimited power. God is a participant in the unfolding of reality. And so that perspective on God really changed my entire theology, my worldview, and it transformed my perspective on the Christian faith, being from one that was I think not, I was never an exclusionary Christian, like this is the only path to God or whatever. But it certainly made me post-Christian. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So identifying with the ideology of the Christian tradition, but not of the church itself, the rituals and those kinds of things. And so, in good conscience and good faith, I couldn't really go into the ministry once I finished the seminary degree. So after I left seminary, I just pursued a normal career. And that kind of left that was the end of one spiritual journey for me, and really my foray into just kind of everyday average American working life. So picked up a job, worked for a very long time in a legal career, not as an attorney, but in the legal field, and have enjoyed that career for a very long time. Still work in that field. And then right around probably, I would say it was probably 2016 or so, I started seeing articles about UFOs and Tom DeLonge, and there were rumors that he was really interested in this, and I found that fascinating. It's not that I had never been interested in UFOs; I just really hadn't spent a ton of time thinking about them. Didn't have UFO books. You know, my books were theology or science fiction. So when this came around, it kind of hit me
Right,
as like,
right,
wow,
right in the middle there.
exactly, thread the
Yeah.
needle. Yeah, so you can
Yeah.
see how the pattern emerges. So
Yeah.
so then I think like a lot of folks, I became maybe for lack of a better term, radicalized in 2017 and was an ardent listener of that UFO podcast, which is Andy McGrillen's podcast. And of course, Dan Zetterstrom, who works with Andy to a certain degree, worked with him a lot then as well, was an avid listener of their show. Andy was on he was a guest on another podcast with this guy, DJ, who was doing like an NBA podcast, but he was really interested in UFOs. So I jumped on as just a listener to join in that conversation and really found I loved it and you know they responded positively, and so after that we all kind of started talking and DJ was like, hey, do you want to try to do a UFO focused show? I said, why not? Let's give it a try. So we started Calling All Beings, and that show is very much you know, kind of a combination of both of our personalities. It's got the zaniness, the craziness, the high energy that DJ brings, his love for people and conversations. I also had that love for people, but I also want to get into the deeper, meatier topics with our guests. So we've had a lot of amazing guests, a lot of the notable names in ufology over the last several years have been on the show, and we've had some pretty cool sound bites that have come out of those conversations as well. So that's been very rewarding. And then at some point in that journey, I developed a friendship with Darren King, who was at that point known as Exo Academian, and Darren's incredible show, Point of Convergence. Longtime listener of his show. And what's funny about that is, I'd been listening to it for many episodes, and I remember exactly where I was. I was sitting on the back porch. It's a nice day, not unlike today. The episode was concluding, and he concludes his episodes the same way every time. So why I never really listened to this or thought about it until this moment, it is strange. It was occluded for me until this one moment. He
Yeah.
always concludes that show, sort of from deep within the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I was like, well, I'm in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Where is this guy? I got to get in touch with this guy. So I, reached out to Darren, and ultimately we decided to meet for coffee. We both happen to live in Asheville. Darren has since moved from Asheville further into southwestern North Carolina. But we decided to start a podcast, which is called Liminal Frames, and that's still ongoing. So we do a show every 3 weeks now, and have almost hit our 70th episode, which is really, really fun. It's been a rewarding conversation to be going through that journey with him. And, I think if you look at my background and kind of what I'm trying to do in this space, it is to validate the experience that people are having, and also, I think, try to catalyze deeper conversations as we wrestle with this material. I'm not necessarily someone that is a 100% in this camp or that camp. I haven't had a traditional experience like a UFO sighting or an abduction experience or anything of that kind. The closest thing I've had to something like that is a dream that I had in college that to this day was still the most vivid dream I've ever had. It was really bizarre, particularly in retrospect. Now that I've got into this field, it has taken even more meaning for me because what it included was a meeting with what I would at the time would have considered this kind of old man at the top of the world. It was like an icy place. It felt like Antarctica or the North Pole. I wasn't sure, but he was not a bearded man, but a goateed man. So if you've ever seen interviews with Dr. Joseph Burks or Chris Bledsoe, I'm sure plenty of your listeners have, a lot like those gentlemen, an older man with a goatee, and he was essentially telling me that it was the end of the world. And I was like, oh, that's really wild. And so then I was transported from that meeting to the coast, which I assumed to be the eastern coast of the United States. I was inside like a high-rise condo on the shore where half of the condo was blown away. Like so I was like on the floor in one of the condo rooms, but there was no balcony. It was just like sheared off and you could see the entire shoreline. As you look down the shoreline, it was like devastation just kind of everywhere. Really, really apocalyptic looking. And then from that being transported to that location, I was transported down to the shore itself, and at that point the ocean had receded. It wasn't there anymore. So you could see the entire ocean floor, the seabed. And in the ocean floor, there were these giant, sort of ring-like structures that kind of formed a skeletal type of pathway deeper into the ocean. And the skies were dark, and in the sky were these swirling bright orbs. And I'd never had an orb sighting, never thought about orbs, knew nothing about them, and that wasn't even really part of my lexicon until getting into this field, but they were
Yeah.
swirling in patterns and everything. And I felt compelled to walk into that pathway. As I start doing that, I hear this voice behind me. I turn around, look at the shoreline, and on the shore is this woman who's saying, you can't go down that path. You got to come back. And that woman was my now wife. We weren't married at the time, but she's this woman that I knew. We had dated a little bit, and so we got back together and ended up getting married. So we'll be 24 years married this year. So that was a crazy dream for me, really. And if you
Yeah.
think about the kind of themes that you see in that dream, they're present in a lot of the conversations that are happening now. And I wrestle with that all the time. It's one of those things that left a big imprint on me and is something that I come back and revisit over and over again. So that's the extent of my real, true phenomenological experience. But of course, I like to think that I'm an experiencer of experiencers, right? So I tend to get into these conversations with folks that have had this deeply powerful experience of their own that I have no touch point to whatsoever. And, you can see how enthusiastic, how committed they are to that experience that left a mark as powerful on them as this left on me. And I'd really just try to suspend belief and go with them in that journey to wherever that conversation goes and postulate, speculate, all those kinds of things. And I find that by doing that, by giving them that space, it's the same grace and space that I would want someone to give to me as I'm sharing something deeply powerful, whether that be the dream I just shared or Some people have the experiences of a dead loved one who visits them, and you're just like, I don't know what to make of this, but wow, that really happened, and it clearly meant that they thought that it happened to them. And so I like to put myself in the shoes of them and just try to be in the moment with that experience. Try not to land on any particular place, but just listen and be present. And I find that I've been very much rewarded in that effort with exploring this topic and what it means for the individual, but also for the human family. And I think for a lot of folks, like you in particular, this has been a key which has unlocked larger conversations about our current predicament, about our history, about our future. What does it all mean? And I think if you go down those paths long enough, you come to this place where you kind of feel like UFOs are not even secondary. They're like very many orders below the important aspect of the questions you start struggling with.
Yeah.
And so I still very much into them, and I've obviously followed the latest breaking news and all those kinds of things. But to me, in some ways, they can almost be a distraction, right? Disclosure
Yeah.
can be a distraction from the deeper quest that we're all on. And so I try to, in my interviews and conversations, really push us to thinking about what that quest is and where are we going and how does it impact our day to day, as opposed to looking at UFOs, as a lot of people I think do, as sort of this like salvific moment in history that if we just unlock this knowledge, that all of a sudden everything changes. And I relate to that feeling because that's exactly how I felt going to seminary. I felt that if I could just unlock this knowledge about Christian history and the Bible and whatever, like it would solve all my problems. Like it would everything would be explained. And what I found was quite the opposite. So when you're left with that feeling where your preconceptions have been shattered and you have to pick up the pieces and say, where am I going from here? You have to then do the hard work, right? You have to do the work. And I think that that's where a lot of folks are more into the entertainment as opposed to the work, and the work is what we all have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I resonate with so much of what you just said. I mean, I could have said a bunch of that. I think that we're on the same page in much of our approach and how we think about this. And so it's one of the reasons why I appreciate your presence more broadly, but also on the show. I think that yeah, we definitely deeply resonate. I liked your point about an experiencer of experiencers. I kind of feel that same way. I've had some moments where there were things going on that felt visionary, but there was never anything that I could solidly point to as external to myself, like a sort of alien cause, so to speak. But I've had encounters, whether they were hypnagogic or hypnopompic, where I felt like there was an other, and there was some sort of communication going on, a download of some sort, even a being, but I'm not sure if it was a dream. And I kind of wonder if certain people aren't, don't get the full encounter because that spurs their curiosity and helps foment deeper conversations. Because I think both of us have kind of turned that curiosity into, deep and vociferous, noise that we keep making. Good conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
I'm wondering, you were in seminary and then you graduated and then you went on to a career that was sort of outside of that. Um, where do you mind if I ask you where you're at now with that and how the UFO topic? And I mean, you work with Darren King, who's one of the deepest thinkers, and I mean, he's brilliant. I'll just
Yep.
flat out say he's brilliant. He's had
100%.
does a lot of thinking about this subject. And where have you come in terms of your relationship with God or the Creator or the universe and its relationship to UFOs? I find myself drawn to like archetypes and sort of psychology, but I'm wondering about
Mhm.
you. How do you link the two together? Your thought?
Yeah, I've talked about it as a kind of redemption of my faith tradition, but also an expansion of it. So, um, I'm fortunate to live close to my parents. My dad and mom are still very active in their church community, and they're Episcopalian now. And he sort of laments the fact that I don't go to church. I'm not in the church family. He thinks that I would really resonate with that, and to a certain degree, he's right. I would resonate with those communities and conversations and those kinds of things. But on the other hand, I also feel and I felt this way in seminary to a certain extent, in part because I learned this lesson the hard way, that a certain kind of a person in a faith community with certain perspectives can do more damage than good if they're not careful. And so I feel a sense of responsibility if I'm in a conversation with, believing Christians or others that I really try carefully not to dislodge, their faith too much or insert too much, material that might kind of cause a break for them. Because breaks happen to me, breaks happen to people that I cared about. And I just don't want to I don't want to be responsible for that. Now, we could argue and debate the merits of that approach, but for me, I feel that it's territory I have to tread very carefully on.
Yeah.
So I'm not really I'm not a Christian by any of the sort of traditional sense of the word. I do like kind of the term post-Christian because I think it does cover in many ways my value system. Um, I think of myself as someone that identifies with Jesus and the teachings of Jesus and kind of the way that he treated people. But I don't identify with the rituals or the seasons and those kinds of things. As far as the relationship with God or the Creator is concerned, I've definitely come to this place where I think there is a larger uh, consciousness that we're all part of, and that we can call it God, we can call it Source, we can call it whatever we want to call it, many names for that. But that it is real. And for me, what I found to be meaningful is to having been absent from the community of faith for so long, I now can see that community as something foreign, right? I can see the rituals that were so familiar to me at one point in my life, to be completely foreign and alien. And that distance, that perspective, I found to be very valuable because I can see how comforting it is, but also how it also kind of handcuffs the concept of God and pigeonholes that into certain anthropomorphic categories for the most part. Now, there's a spectrum of faith, of course. There are many Christians that don't have an anthropomorphic perspective of God, and I think that's fine. Um, but I am a person of, to a certain degree, kind of faith, but I feel part of that deeper consciousness. I think like Darren, I'm more an idealist and a materialist, I'm more non-dualist than a dualist. I think that we're all part of the same thing, that we are consciousness sort of experiencing itself.
Mhm.
Uh, there is also this deep enigmatic quality to existence. And so all of these things, as we try to put names on them, they all fall short, right? It's why these Zen koans are so great because they kind of break that rationality and you're left with the puzzle. And I think that is really important. I identify very much with both the mystics, but also with the individuals that feel like they have to pin down every aspect of the theology. And I think that perspective, at least for me, has been valuable in the UFO community because, and really the larger community in this time of divisive politics and everything, that, I've come to a place where I really look at different perspectives as pieces of this larger source, right? So instead of me thinking, oh my gosh, how do they believe this? And they're right wing or left wing, and I don't want to associate with them or whatever. I kind of see that as this manifestation of source, and I try to identify with that manifestation and be at peace with that as well. That these are movements of consciousness. These are the way in which consciousness experiences itself. It can do so in right wing ways, left wing ways, everything in between, and to be able to see that and recognize that and understand, come to a place of understanding that for me has brought a greater sense of peace and connection to those that I normally would just be trying to keep at arm's length or deeply disagree with. I really try to find that deeper connection and see what parts of me, what parts of source are in them as well. And that just, I find that to be very helpful. So yeah, I think I am a believer in source and the creator, but it's nothing like what I grew up with in any way, shape, or form. I'm sure there's still vestiges of those beliefs inside somewhere, but that's not how I live out my spiritual journey on the day to day.
Yeah. It's been an interesting collision for me to start from a place of UFOs and whatnot, and kind of a vague interest in psi phenomenon, sort of the consciousness, and then have that all evolve the way it has to where I'm basically like, a mystic these days in that I believe like you, and that sort of the perennial philosophy idea that we're all sort of sparks of this one consciousness that's folded back on itself and is experiencing itself. And that, existence is sort of that evolution, is the evolution of that consciousness as it is trying to get somewhere internally, kind of,
Hmm.
and it's interesting. I've been doing a lot of reading on, some, Jungian stuff, and also just some mystics, and the idea that, all of these different religious approaches have all sort of come from I think, an initial taste of that non-dual like realization, and that that was the impetus for a lot of these things. And then the church and everything else that springs up around it is sort of the detritus that tries to, exert some level of control over the population that maybe hasn't had those experiences, and that's kind of the gross human part of it. But again, like you were saying, I mean, it's all an expression of consciousness. So we need to be forgiving about every layer and, I think, mistake that gets made, because it's all part of this one being trying to actualize itself. And it gets hard, like in these moments now, like politics is so toxic. And I have my brother. I deeply, deeply disagree with his politics, and we can't really have a conversation these days without it kind of descending into at least, heavy sighs and dirty looks. And but I know he's a good person. I know he thinks about people and he cares and he has empathy. And like there are a few people that I'd say, if the world ended, I'd want him in my on my team, and he's one of them. But I also struggle with, well, if the world's ending, he might have had something to do with it, or his team, with what their philosophy is and their approach. Um, we're all part of whatever milieu we come out of. And, he surrounds himself with the information that backs up his opinions, as do I, as we all do. And so I think it's all sort of a fractured misunderstanding, and we kind of just are all speaking different languages, just like all the religions are, I think, referring to the same thing, but use different symbol systems, you
Yes.
know? And like with Christianity in particular, like there was a moment when I was a kid where I went to church and they were like, and I remember the actual service where the preacher was talking about Jesus made it so that even if you think about lust, you're basically being lustful,
Hmm.
and that's you're committing adultery basically by thinking about adultery. And I was like 11 years old and I couldn't stop thinking about boobs. So I was like, I can't stop. And
Rude.
if that means that I'm going to burn in hell for eternity, I don't want any part of that. Something's wrong there.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a beautiful way to conceive of that whole theology that's based on symbol, and sort of the descent of the divine into man, the internal Christ. All of that has deep resonance for me, So it's like I have to learn how to kind of try and read systems to underline my own approach. And if I do that, I find I'm much more forgiving of things that don't quite fit, and like you said, much more sensitive to the idea that even if people are approaching it in a way that I find that I find unappealing, there's good in that, and it's not my responsibility to go around trying to disrupt people's belief systems and argue them out of their faith,
Hmm.
because there's something, I think, good and reasonable about people trying to have those kind of moral things in their life. And even if I don't necessarily agree with some of the directions that leads, it's all important,
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I feel like the one benefit that the church community offers that we've in many ways lost in the current day is this wrestling together over over common themes in the human experience.
Right.
And the one thing that if you kind of follow the church calendar year or some of the bigger themes within the Christian tradition, you see the human condition writ large in these stories, whether it be wrestling with, our brokenness or our amazing power for redemption, or, all these different themes are present. And those texts, as stale as they often become for many people, can serve as these focal points for us to revisit these concepts. And that's one thing that I've always enjoyed about whether it be poetry or preaching or novels, this powerful evocative quality that language has to take the listener, the reader, the consumer on a journey within. If you're really listening and being a participant, you're going in and you're trying to battle with what these ideas are evoking within yourself. And if you're not seeing yourself in the story, and if you're not seeing your adversary in the story, whoever that may be, you're just not paying attention. And
Yeah.
so I really value those kinds of communities. I wish there were a better way. I wish there were a better manifestation of it now in our day and age. And I think many of us probably feel that way, that maybe our closest approximation to that would be like our neighborhood, or a special interest group that we might have, where we might have a little community that kind of gets together and talks about our favorite books or our favorite movies, whatever it is. It's something similar, but those are also somewhat superficial, right?
Yeah.
They're these very top level things, and these scriptures, whether they be the Christian or other faith traditions, they force us to deal with these deeper things. They don't allow us to brush them aside. They are confrontational, and I don't think we have a lot of confrontational traditions now that allow us, that present us with opportunities for true growth, and that's what we need. We need to be able to grow in our perspectives, in our relationships, all of those things. And so many of us are hungry for that. And I think you find that a lot of that in the UFO community. You find a lot of hunger for deeper connection, but
Mhm.
there's no really good lodestar, sort of to help us do that. And you often find people that go to the conventions or the lectures, they come back with this deep sense of purpose or energy. They're energized. I know you've been to some of those, I have too, and you come back like, this was so great. Got to talk with these people, really connect with folks, and then you just kind of, we slide back into our social media channels and bubbles, and we forget that feeling, or we might just wait until we can chase the next one. I want to go to the next convention, the next convention. You're kind of trying like an addict. You're hitting that next high, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know what a new, maybe more persistent tradition might look like. I think that a lot of people want that, and I think it needs to be authentic, and that's difficult, right? One thing that Darren talks a lot about is something he calls radical transparency. But essentially, it's just being truly, genuinely authentic with people that you're engaging with. And so it's trying your very best not to be opaque with them, to be as transparent as you can be. And through that process of openness, you dissolve the barriers that we've created between each other. We dissolve the masks that we wear. And this comes from that concept that we are all one.
Yeah.
We're all part of source. And if you can do that effectively, then essentially you become one with them as well. It's, we're hitting on these themes in a lot of the things that the community has jumped on over the last year. And the telepathy tapes is a great example of this as well, that I think people listen to those stories and go, gosh, like, that's I want to be known like they are known and they can know. We all deeply want that, but how do we achieve it? Well, you don't have to be autistic to achieve it. You just have to really work at being intentional and being authentic with people that you are closest to. And
Yeah.
and you can achieve that. At least I think you can achieve something close to it.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I found out. I mean, I am an addict. I'm in recovery for heroin addiction. And one of the first things that I discovered when I went into recovery, the 12-step program, is that radical transparency is what you achieve when you go into the rooms, right? Like you basically say, I'm James, just a first name, nothing else, and here's my story. Here's all the struggle, all the mistakes, all the worst things I've ever done, right? Get that out of the way, and you throw that up at first, and that's almost like your your passport into the realm, right? And I was absolutely blown away. I mean, almost tearful to be in a room of folks who were just sharing the stuff that is like so often held secret. Like you can't, and I think that uh, part of the reason why, AA and NA are seen as spiritual experiences, beside the fact that they talk about God a little bit, is the fact that it's a spiritual interaction. These like the laying down of distance and like trying to build authentic relationships. It doesn't happen almost anywhere else in our culture anymore. And a lot of it is being, desperately honest and being desperately or, being empathetic to what other people have gone through because their stories are often mirror your own. And I had Zach Stein, a philosopher, on the show recently, and he was talking about value. And a lot of it that we used to get from the church is a sense of what to value or what kinds of questions we should ask about our values and how we shape them, whether as a community or as individuals. And, those are the conversations we're not having. Everything is on a surface level, skin deep about, status or likes or um, just, that layer of existence. And we're neglecting those deeper parts of us, which is kind of which led me to some of the thinking that I've gotten to with the UFO phenomenon. If we're all one thing, if this is all sort of one universal mind, then is there an aspect of the mind that represents what we're currently going through as some sort of anathema, some sort of disease or dysfunction, and another part is trying to, heal that by signaling, instead of it being chemical signals in the brain, it's symbol signals that may be manifesting in physical reality, the UFOs and the other, and but the communication that they're delivering is often, where's your sense of meaning? You're killing your planet and yourselves, and you seem to be completely oblivious to it. Wake up, kind of, is what the message seems to be. Um, what are your thoughts on that? It's interesting and a complex thing to discuss because some people think that if you are talking about that, then you're trying to take away from the concrete reality of what they've experienced, and that is very much not what I'm saying. I just believe that reality has aspects to it that are mental, and that can manifest in ways that seem like mind in terms of its malleability, but it's actually just as physical as anything else, and hence the metamaterials and those sorts of things. But it may not be aliens on, another planet as opposed to other islands within this sort of sea of consciousness.
Yeah, I think that the reality has an immune response, right? And
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of what much of this is. Just like in our own bodies, when we are dealing with a foreign invader or whatever, our bodies have an immune response to that, and we might have a fever, we might, form a scab, whatever it might be, to try to attack that substance. It looks abnormal. It's like, well, this is something I don't want to experience day to day, but it is trying to rebalance your system, and to a certain degree, I think you could argue that many of these experiences function like that, that they are reminders, and they are um, the T cells of reality sort of coming into our day-to-day experience, and trying to shake us out of our stupor, or maybe where our polarity is too fixed in one direction. It's trying to rebalance that sense of direction to something that might be more neutral or healthier. Any system that I think goes too far in one direction is really gonna it's gonna manifest in ways that I think are ultimately not very healthy, which is really interesting and perplexing too. I think because it for many people, I think that they look at when we talk about this consciousness component of UFOs and the phenomena, there's a perspective that I think tends to look at it from the standpoint of let's achieve this greater oneness, whatever it is, at the exclusion of materialist specificity, concreteness, atomization. Let's shed that and leave that behind, and let's become one. And I think that that is also a problematic perspective. it kind of has these eschatological undertones that, at the end of time, things will be made right and will be in this utopic experience that all pain, all sorrow, is gone. And I think that if you wrestle with that truth or that idea, like I would try to wrestle with it as a child, these notions of heaven, right, where everything's perfect, you come to this conclusion that that wouldn't be any good at all. That
Yeah.
it's the friction between the good and the bad that creates the true meaning and the joy and experience. And I think that's in many ways why, if we can use the metaphor of source consciousness and ultimately being one thing, that if there is a polarity that lands in that place where oneness is oneness experiencing oneness, and that there's really nothing else, there's nothing else but that. I think there is also kind of loneliness. There's a fullness, but a loneliness as well. And so I think that there's a momentary uh, expression of madness that occurs in that moment, in that situation, that then manifests into reality as we experience it. So source, in a sense, kind of think of it as a solitary voice in a chamber, and it screams out, and then you have the reverberations in the chamber of those screams, those interference patterns, interacting with one another, and those patterns create other sounds, other voices, other experiences, and that's really what we are experiencing, is the downstream of that fracturing. And I think Bernardo Kastrup, he talks about the disassociated alters, right? So
Yeah.
it's that disassociation. And I say all that to say that to me, it's important to kind of try to maintain a sense of balance in all of these expressions. That there is truth in the oneness. There's also truth and beauty in the many, and to say that we should do one at the exclusion of the other, I think is the wrong approach. And that's where I sort of balk a little bit at this. There's often kind of this language of evolution, this evolution
Hmm.
of consciousness. It's not that that's not true. It's just that I think that we have conflated or associated evolution with good, with better, with best. And I think
Yeah.
that that's a wrong way to look at that. It's evolution as being fit for certain moments, not necessarily better. And when we look at from a fitness standpoint, then I think we can appreciate the way reality is expressing itself in this moment. Even if there is chaos, it befits the moment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, that gives me a better sense, a more peaceful appreciation for the way that reality, at least in this chaotic time, reality is unfolding.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like there's that whole teleological idea that we're going somewhere, and that devalues the moment we're in because we're waiting for that next thing. It's like when is everything going to be perfect? But if what if the journey is the point, right? Like if the joys and suffering of every moment is what's to be cherished, and we all are sitting around waiting for that next thing, then we're not savoring the actual important details that potentially are the whole reason why we're in this plane to begin with. That's an important point. It's it, I find myself drawn to that evolutionary idea just because I feel like we're in such a shithole right now,
Yeah,
and that's
putting it
and
mildly.
that's yeah, yeah, and that's a character weakness of mine a little bit. It's like I want there to be a point, like why, and that gets into the whole like disclosure conversation. Kelly, among others, has talked about, and yourself, that disclosure is kind of a mirage, and that shouldn't be what's driving our conversation. That there's more here about us and about the universe that we can learn that isn't disclosure. And find myself totally agreeing with her. Like, I don't even know how we would even begin to talk about disclosure, because what are we actually disclosing? And I don't think we're really going to know that for a long time, even if we get, confirmation that there is some other in the universe that isn't the fundamental truth. But my question, I guess, is what should drive us on then as a community if we're not pushing for disclosure and we're not pushing for, an evolution of consciousness into some happy place, existential happy meal. what are we pushing for? What should we be working towards? What's the important part of our our community's mission if there is a singular thing?
Yeah, that is a great question. Also love what did you how did you put it? Happy Meal, what is it?
Existential happy meal?
Existential Happy Meal. Fantastic. That should be on a t-shirt. Um, so I think it's helpful to think of this, at least it is for me, individually and collectively. So individually, we all, I think, can look at moments in our lives where we were listening to that inner voice, that pull that said, this is what you need to do. And we all know what that feels like, and we wrestle with that voice all the time. Now, we can argue that need to do voice is culturally conditioned. It is, sort of genetic or whatever it might be. And I'm fine with those arguments. But I will say that by listening to that voice, that lure, that pull, and this may be my kind of process theology background there coming through, that is an answering, if we're choosing to, we're answering that as a kind of call. It's a higher call to be more true to ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Um, but for everyone, that looks different. For everyone, that manifests differently. And I think we have to be honest with who we are and where we are in our own journeys and not try to co-opt the journeys of others. So, oh, I want to be just like so and so, and I want to, the Dalai Lama, and I want to be a monk, and maybe that's your path, but maybe you're just trying to play Dalai Lama, and you're not actually being the Dalai Lama, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there's the individual, and then there's this collective, right? And so as a collective, I think there is a kind of similar uh, conscious awareness, immune response, inner voice that is something that we need to be aware of and listen to. And that's challenging. I mean, if we look at our collective today, we can say one side has a certain inner voice and another has seemingly a very opposite inner voice. Well, which voice is correct? And both are valid. Both, I think, we need to look at as valid voices, but there is a power in the conflict of those two perspectives. So that and this is something that is uncomfortable, right? But it's the conflict that really creates the growth. And so for us to, I think, go into our bubbles and our echo chambers and say, let's not conflict. Let's just agree to like live on each side of the divide. Well, what do we see when that happens? We see zero growth happening at all. And this is where I think the human family is so powerful because you mentioned your brother. I was in my head just nodding along because my brother is similar. And I love the guy, but we definitely have different perspectives. But think about the beauty of the human family and also in maybe in the West you could think of Thanksgiving, right? So you have these moments where you're stuck in a room with people that you love and that you have decided, whether you're through your own choosing or just because of happenstance, they're your family, and you're committed to them and they are committed to you, and come hell or high water you're going to work it out. And I think that microcosm, that family, is what we have lost in a macrocosmic way. We've
Yeah.
lost the ability to wrestle constructively with one another, empathetically with one another, to agree to disagree, and continue to come back to that table, to that conversation, to that work. We talked about work, putting in the work. I mean, you see this manifested in marriages, you see it manifested in longtime friendships, you see it manifested in sibling rivalries. These are things that they're part of the human story. It's against our nature, quite frankly, to deny that conflict and to go the other way. And so I think we're at a moment where we've got to redeem this sense of human family and really lean in to what it means. And we can get past all of our talking points, all of our dunking on the opposition, all of our trying to get scoring this point or that point, get past all of that and really try to get down to the table where we share the meal, the table where we share the grief, the table where we share our hopes and dreams. Like that's the kind of stuff that we are missing and we need and we crave. And so we're really denying ourselves that, right? By just going into our corners and pretending that the other side is not human, doesn't exist, whatever it is, to make you feel better about yourself and that you're not who they are. You're othering them, and othering them is a path to darkness.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I spend a lot of time wondering about how we get there without some sort of existential calamity. It's like part of like I'm deeply feel the need for what you just said, but I'm also engaged in this reality where I don't see, given the forces at play and the environment, and mentally that we all exist in online, and we're all constantly reinforced in our opinions. Unless something terrible happens, what's going to shake us out of the of stasis, And that's scary because that puts you in a position of almost hoping for calamity so that someday people will, look around and say, these are our fellow humans, not just an enemy to be beaten up or, shat upon.
Well, I don't think you're wrong. I think
Yeah.
I think that, look at history and look at our crowning moments, where we as a society have said this is our best. And whatever preceded that best is really dark. The darkest expression of of who we are and what we are capable of. And so that is true of whether, great societal movements or these punctuated moments of grief in our lived experience. If you're estranged from your siblings and one of your parents passes away, well, that's a catalyst for reconnection. And you might put aside the petty arguments that you had years ago, and you might decide to reconnect. And one side may have to humble themselves, one side may have to forgive, one side may have to forget. Whatever it is to create that bridge to reconnection, that's what is required. And honestly, maybe that is what happens. So the polarization tendency that we see happening in this developmental journey of consciousness. So there are times when we are less polarized and more polarized, and then less polar, and so on and so forth. At these great extremes are when the frictions really bubble to the surface, where the potentiality is so great for conflict and catastrophe. That's when it becomes manifest. And in a way, it's kind of it's a type of scapegoating. It's a type of exorcism of that energy to disperse it, dispel it, and bring us back together. Um, I hate that that is the case. I mean, I wish we could just not require that, right? I mean, it's sort of like when you have a child and you're watching them grow up, and I really wish they didn't have to experience loss. I wish they didn't have to experience pain and conflict and all of these things, and I wish I could protect them, and you can't. And it's that desire to shield them that ultimately ends up hurting them. You've got to
Exactly right.
give
Right.
them that freedom.
Yeah.
And you see this, like, this is where I could point to the Christian tradition too. You see that as part of that tradition, like letting humanity follow its own choices. And some Christians will say, we're fallen by nature, so we're damned. And others will say we're naturally good. You can see kind of both poles within the same tradition. So it's all there. And we just lost, I think, a good way uh, to communicate that, to live that in our day to day. Our tools have made it too easy for us to avoid each other. And so what I need to do and what everybody needs to do more of is find the person that you have a little friction with, and try to lean into that and say, hey, like, let's connect, and I don't want you, I would never have you on my show, but we really should have this conversation. And
Yeah.
we might end up concluding the show in the exact same place we started, but let's make the effort, right? I wish there were more of that happening in the community, and I happen to be in a position where I could try to make that happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're almost out of time. I wanted to ask you sort of the general question of like what that's happening right now are you most avidly following? just for to sort of get a glimpse of what your perspective is on the things that are happening currently. So much has gone on with like Jake Barber and the Skywatcher crew and what they're doing in terms of classifying and their discovery document and all of that, which I find really interesting. And I also find him interesting because he's upsetting a lot of the um, stereotypes of we have of folks and how they approach this topic. He seems to be coming from one direction, but he thinks about things from a different direction, and I find that refreshing. But anyway, I mean, to sort of wrap up this conversation, what are you following currently within ufology that you find the most interesting or the most telling, and why?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be interested in right now. I think Jake Barber is a good example. David Grush being brought back on with Eric Burleson's office is very interesting. There were very high hopes in the congressional sort of aspects for disclosure, and I can remember exactly where I was in 2023 when the Schumer's office released that announcement about the language for the bill, and how amazing it was, and like, it's happening, it's imminent,
It's
it's like
happening. Yeah.
showing it to my wife and like, look at this, like it's real. And I can remember that feeling, and you go through those hearings, and the Grush testimony and everything that followed, and you just kind of go, why did this not materialize in the way that I thought it would? I think that we're locked in. A lot of people talk about this battle, between the gatekeepers and those pushing for disclosure. I think that there is some truth to that. I think that is, whether that be intentional or just sort of like institutional inertia, that some of these deep, dark programs just kind of they've been there a long time and they're hard to get unstuck for various reasons. Is there some cabal that's sort of literally, preventing news outlets from reporting on it? I don't know that I'd go that far, but I think people underestimate the inertia of these long standing systems and traditions and those kinds of things, programs. So I am looking to see a little bit of break in that somewhere, and I think if you're looking for that, you actually do see it, right? So we see uh, examples of folks who are coming forward from within these programs or closer to the programs. Barber is a good example. Herrera is a good example. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was on with Jesse Michaels, who he went into the underground base and saw some floating orb or whatever. Like that's an
Yeah.
example. I mean, there are lots of examples where folks are coming forward. I recently revisited Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project National Press Club event from 2001. You watch that, which if your listeners haven't watched it, you should definitely check it out. It's on YouTube.
I'll
Um,
link it in the description
yeah,
here, folks. Yeah.
that'd be perfect. A young Stephen Greer, very animated, same kind of guy that he is today, but you can tell, like, convinced that the dam is about to break. He's got all these amazing, witnesses, and it's very compelling, very interesting, and look where we are, right? So,
Yeah.
the perspective is interesting, but what I found to be motivating is that a lot of the witnesses from then talk about how they know people within the program. So they know people who've been close to this or that. Well, we actually know who some of those people are now, right? I mean, so for those folks that say there's no momentum, I tend to disagree. There clearly is momentum, and there are people who feel more emboldened to speak about what they know. Is this all an orchestrated disclosure? We've had the James Webb Telescope thing that, like, a year later, right after they talked about this, now we get some results, and
Yeah.
in many ways it feels like that, a little bit of a drip drip disclosure where you can kind of adjust the dials here and there, and when the time is right, the soil is already prepared. I don't know how orchestrated that is, and you'll find people with varying perspectives on that. Some will speculate that, oh, it's all NHI, man. They're controlling this whole thing. It's all about this and that, and it's this unseen hidden hand that is moving it. And perhaps that is part of it. But I also think there's just the way humans are, the way institutions are. This is how change occurs, and we're in the midst of it. We're in the midst of a societal shift in the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about our place in the universe, about our science, about our history. We are right in that churn, and it's very difficult. to see the other side of it. Now you give us 50 years and we'll look back and go, haha, look, that was the time. Like that's when things were happening. And look where we are now. I can't believe those people thought those ridiculous things 50 years ago,
Yeah.
before we had all this, whatever it is. And that's just the way history works, right? That's the way these things work. And I think that's a good reminder too for us to not be so sort of haughty about where we are now and thinking that we've got it all figured out. It helps to have that historical perspective.
Yeah.
We look down on the people from 100 years ago and how ignorant they were. Well, we will be looked down just as much in the future. So it's a long way of saying, I do pay close attention to this stuff. I do think there is forward momentum. I'm hopeful for Skywatcher. I want them to succeed. Just like everybody else, I want to see, the convincing evidence. I'm hopeful for congressional movement. I want them to get their, heads out of their butts and figure this out and show that they're actually interested in making some movement. I want the president to do whatever he says he's going to do when it comes to disclosure. I want another country to take the lead. I mean, we can't be the only ones that have had some sort of exposure to this. And but let's not forget what's happening with the Nazca mummies and all that kind of stuff that we poo-pooed. I think those are interesting too. There's just a lot of stuff out there that is adding to the scale, right? We're just throwing things onto the scale, and eventually the scale tips. And it may be very subtle, but that moment will come and we'll go, oh yeah, like here we are. It may not
Yeah.
be as climactic as we want it to be, but it may just come, it may arrive kind of with a whisper rather than with a bang.
Well, that's exactly what I think the people who, if there is a slow drip of disclosure, that's what they're hoping for, right? Is to get to this point where it's just like we're stepping from one reality to another and there's no big disruption. But in light of our earlier conversation about like how do we shake things up enough to have this rethink of who and what we are and what we're doing and how to engage with each other in reality? It's almost as if we're trying to skip the very step that is the medicine we need to fix the problems that we most fundamentally have. Uh, and yeah, that's just, I mean,
Yeah, you
that would
couldn't
be
be more right.
unfortunate. Yeah, it's like there's the elites who have power right now. They want to maintain if that's what's going on, they want to maintain this paradigm long enough that they will still be in control when the paradigm flips. Well, is that what we need, and is that what we want? And who knows, right?
Yeah. No, I think we do. We need to take our medicine, and it may be that comes in the form of a catastrophe, and who knows what kind, but there may be one, and
There always
maybe
is, actually.
there always is.
Throughout human history, there's always been one. So
Count on it. So, as we pick up the pieces from that catastrophe, it may be that's the catalyst that brings this into reality. Uh, we'll see.
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Nathan, for a wonderful conversation, as always. I appreciate you. I appreciate your perspective and everything. So thank you.
Thanks, James. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.